He started as a chauffeur. He ended up changing how the world moved. In the 1910s, in the small town of Columbus, Indiana, a young man with grease permanently worked the creases of his hands while driving a wealthy banker around town. He had no fortune, no family name, and no formal education past the 8th grade. What he had instead was an almost supernatural gift for machinery, a stubbornness that bordered on the heroic, and a willingness to fail in public again and again until he finally got it right. His name was Clessie Cummins, and he would carry himself from the front seat of another man's automobile to the founding of one of the most important engine companies in the history of the world. This is the story of the farm boy who put the diesel engine into the American truck and how in the end he lost control of the empire he built. Clessie Lyle Cummins was born in December 1988 on a farm in rural Indiana. Formal school ended for him at the 8th grade when he was needed for work, but his real education never stopped for a single day. The stories of his boyhood are almost too good to be true. As a child of about 11, he taught himself to build a working steam engine out of brass shotgun shells and pennies shaped into pistons, soldered to a kerosene can that served as a boiler that had an alarming habit of blowing up on the kitchen stove and singeing the neighborhood mothers. He had that rarest kind of mind, the kind that could look at a machine, any machine, and simply understand how it wanted to work. As a young man, he drifted through Indiana's early automotive and machine shops, even brushing up against the racing world before he came into the employ of a prominent banking family in Columbus, the Irwins. He worked as their chauffeur and mechanic, and that connection would change the entire course of his life. In 1918, Clessie and his employer, the banker William Irwin, witnessed a demonstration of an imported engine designed by a man named Rasmus Witt, an engine that burned cheap oil instead of gasoline. The diesel principle had been invented only about 2 decades earlier by Rudolf Diesel, and it was still exotic, still mostly confined to ships and stationary power plants. But Clessie saw the future in it. In 1919, he learned he could license Witt's design, and he went to Irwin and asked for the money to pay the fee. Irwin and a group of his associates put up the funds, and in February of 1919, the Cummins Engine Company was born in a small shed in Columbus, Indiana. Their first product was a modest engine around 6 horsepower, meant to put diesel power into the hands of the American farmer, but success did not come. In fact, the company very nearly died in its cradle, and it would keep nearly dying for more than a decade. Around 1920, Cummins struck what looked like a golden deal to supply engines through the mighty Sears Roebuck catalog. On paper, it was a triumph. In reality, it was a disaster. The engines based on that licensed design simply were not good enough, breaking down and disappointing the farmers who bought them. By 1922, both Sears and Cummins knew the venture had failed, and they began unwinding it. Cummins had delivered some 3,000 engines, and a great many came right back as returns. Irwin had now sunk a small fortune into the company with almost nothing to show for it, and even a patient friend's patience has limits. Clessie understood the brutal truth that would define his entire career. If the licensed design was not good enough, he would have to throw it out and build something better himself. So he did. He poured himself into designing his own diesel engines from the ground up. But a better engine is worthless if no one believes in it, and in the 1920s, almost no one believed a diesel belonged in a moving vehicle. They thought it too heavy, too crude, too slow to ever replace gasoline. So Clessie set out to prove them wrong in the most public, most unforgettable way he could imagine. He turned to spectacle. What Clessie Cummins did next made him a national name. In 1930, he took a used Packard limousine, tore out its gasoline engine, and installed one of his own diesels. Then he drove it from Indianapolis all the way to New York City. When he arrived and added up the cost of the fuel for that entire journey across half the country, the figure was reported at just over $1. The newspapers could not resist it. Here was a luxury automobile that had crossed much of the nation on pennies. But Clessie was only getting started. In 1931, he entered a diesel-powered car in the most famous race in America, the Indianapolis 500. And in a race utterly defined by frantic pit stops for fuel, his diesel did something that had never been done before. It ran the entire 500 miles without stopping even once for fuel. The message to America was now impossible to ignore. Diesel was not just for freighters and locomotives. Diesel was efficient, durable, and ready for the open road. There is even a beloved legend that Clessie once convinced an entire town he had built an engine that ran on river water, a tall tale that captures the man perfectly, equal parts genius and showman, never afraid to put on a performance to make a point. The real commercial breakthrough finally arrived in 1933 with the Model H engine, used in small railroad switching locomotives, the company's first genuine sustained success after 14 long years of struggle. And from there, Clessie Cummins rode the wave he had spent his life trying to create. As trucking exploded across America in the decades that followed, fleet owners discovered exactly what he had been shouting for years. A diesel truck could run farther on cheaper fuel and outlast anything else on the road. The diesel engine became the undisputed king of heavy transport, and the company that bore his name became a giant. Over his lifetime, Clessie Cummins would be granted 33 United States patents and would set multiple world records for speed and endurance in trucks and cars. And yet, here is the bittersweet heart of the story, the part that rarely makes it onto the celebratory plaques. Clessie founded the company, but he never truly controlled it. The Irwin family held the financial power, and they always had. Over the decades, as the struggling little shop grew into a serious corporation, tensions grew between the inventor and the businessmen who had funded him. Clessie was a creator and a showman, not a corporate administrator, and as the company professionalized and grew more valuable, its founder increasingly found himself pushed toward the edges of the very empire that carried his own name. Eventually, the man who started it all departed the company he had willed into existence. But genius does not retire easily, and Clessie had one more act left in him, perhaps his finest. In his later years, after leaving the company, he turned his mind to a problem every trucker knew intimately: how to slow a heavy loaded truck safely down a long, steep mountain grade without burning up the brakes entirely. His solution was brilliant. He invented a device that used the engine itself as a brake, turning the diesel into a giant air compressor that absorbed the truck's momentum and held it back. He had to take this invention elsewhere, licensing it to the Jacobs Company, and it became known across the trucking world by a name every driver still recognizes today: the Jake Brake. It would go on to save countless lives on dangerous descents. It was a second masterpiece from a man supposedly past his prime. Clessie Cummins died in 1968 at the age of 79. Think about the RC of that life. He began with nothing but a gift and a banker's gamble. He built a company that still bears his name today and powers machines in nearly every country on earth. He dragged the diesel engine against fears and constant doubt into the very heart of American industry and transportation. And though he lost control of the empire he founded, though the businessmen ultimately held the reins, his fingerprints are on every diesel truck that has ever climbed an American hill, and his engine brake still calls out across every mountain grade. The chauffeur, it turned out, did not just drive history, he built the engine underneath it.